Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Build and Scale Boldly podcast, the podcast for purpose-driven women entrepreneurs who want to grow their businesses with more ease, more profit, and more impact. I'm your host, Dr. Leti Alto, physician, entrepreneur, and real estate investor. And today we're going to be talking about David Rico's 5 givens, and we're going to be applying them to business. And this is a framework that should really help you navigate the waves of entrepreneurship with a whole lot less suffering. If you've ever thought to yourself, why does this business feel so hard and harder than it should? Or I'm doing everything right. Why is this happening? You're not alone. But the issue isn't actually your strategy. What if the expectation underneath is actually causing all that suffering? So what I really want to talk about today is what really works to reducing suffering. Now, several years ago, I was introduced to David Rico's 5 givens of life. And I want to tell you, I've used them constantly. I've used them as a parent, and I've also used them as a business owner almost every single day. And the goal of learning these 5 givens isn't to become numb, isn't to become passive. It's actually to reduce suffering and increase freedom in your life and your business. Because what actually creates suffering in your business is not the challenge itself. It's the way that you argue with reality and you don't believe the challenge should have happened. And so you say things to yourself like, this shouldn't be happening, or why me? Or if I was better, this wouldn't have happened, or I really need to get in the weeds. I need to control everything. And as a result, you have a lot of pain along the way. Well, when you accept the 5 givens that I'm going to introduce you to today, you may actually notice that you move forward easier. You have a lot less frustration, less bitterness, and less emotional whiplash because you're not arguing with reality. And this is not because business becomes easier, but because you stop being yanked around by external circumstances and start to kind of control your internal space. And what this gives you is something that is priceless. And that's a space between something happening and how you respond to that. So today I want to walk you through each given. I'm going to translate it into business language. I'm going to give you practical ways for how to use it in a hard season in business, but also in an easier season in business so you're not clinging to that season and not wanting something to change. And as we go along today, I want you to keep asking yourself, where am I fighting with reality right now in my business? Because the fight piece is what's actually exhausting you, and really want this to help it be easier for you. Okay, let's get right into it with given number 1. So that is, everything changes and everything ends. And what this means is everything is impermanent in your business and in life, right? Your relationships, your situations, your structures, everything will change. And resisting this change leads to clinging, and it also leads to a really deep feeling of loss. Now, if you've been in business for longer than 5 minutes, you already know this is true. You know this intellectually anyway, but you may not be leading and living it. So how change oftentimes shows up in business and in what I've experienced is 2 different ways. There's change that comes from the outside world, and that is constantly happening. Customer desires change, the economy shifts, platforms come and go, legal rules change. One of your employees can have a life event and that totally change how they show up in your business, or they might actually leave your business. So the external world is always changing. This is out of your control. But also your business itself must change, and this must be something that you actually do every single month and every single year to make sure that your business stays relevant. Because if you don't do anything new in your business, it will die eventually because of the external world always changing. And so what you want to continuously do in your business is something we call CANI, which is constant and never-ending improvement, which is constantly improve on what you're doing and innovate and make things better. Another way to say it is what got you to this business stage that you're in right now is not going to get you to the next stage. And so you're in a business right now that eventually is going to have to change. I love how Tony Robbins says it. He says, think about the business you're in right now, but think about the business you need to be in 5 or 10 or 15 years. Because the idea is that your business today is going to be actually a completely different business in 10 or 15 years. It may serve different customers, it may have different services, it may even be a completely different business focused on a completely different niche. So your business will change over time based on what your customers need and what the external changes that are happening around you. So when I work with women who are scaling from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 figures, one of the most painful moments is actually when they realize, I can't keep doing things like I used to, and they fight with it, right? Rather than saying, okay, this is a situation, let me come up with solutions, let me move on, and let me realize that change is inevitable. This is just part of that change, and I need to move forward, and I need to change what I'm doing. And having this 5 given in place really allows you to remind yourself, and understanding this first of the 5 givens, that everything changes and everything ends, really allows you to remind yourself of that, move forward, have less suffering, and go and deal with the problem and come up with a solution rather than fighting against reality and spending your energy that way. So I wanted to make this practical. So the leadership move that I ask you to do right now is think about your business and say, what season am I in? And what season is this business in? And what does this season actually require? And what do I need to change right now in this business intentionally? But also, what is externally changing in my environment that I need to be responding to by, again, changing something in my business? So everything changes and everything ends. And I'm going to add one more piece to that. When something ends, something new begins. And so this is your opportunity to say, hey, yeah, something is changing. Let me come up with solutions. Let me come up with a pivot, and let me begin something new. And so that's a really great way to use this given in your business day to day. So number 2 given is things do not always go according to plan. And isn't this the truth? You can create the best plan and have the best strategy, but life is unpredictable. And when you fight with this idea that things are not going to go according to your plan, you get a lot of frustration. You might even get angry. But when you think about it, business is basically like you create a plan, you create a strategy, you start executing on that plan, you're measuring results, but ultimately you have to pivot, right? Pivots are part of it. And this takes us right back to number 1, right? Everything changes and everything ends, because you can have the best strategy and the best plan, the best roadmap laid out, everybody agrees on it. And then all of a sudden there's some change that happens. Maybe your kid gets sick, your independent contractor disappears, or your team member quits, or you have a launch that flops, or a platform changes its algorithm, or whatever that happens in your business externally. And all of a sudden your perfect plan becomes an outdated document. This is why most of us don't create 5 or 10 year business plans, right? We're really focused on the next year and all the things that we can do. Now, of course, we're thinking about the business we're going to be in the future, but we're not creating a plan of how to get there per se. Now, this is where perfectionists suffer when things don't go according to plan. And the perfectionist says, well, if I plan well enough, if I take care of all the loose ends, I won't have to feel uncertainty and everything's going to work out exactly as I thought it was going to. But entrepreneurship, we've talked about in previous episodes, is all about uncertainty. And there is a saying that I've shared with you before that I think it's important to bring back up, which is, the quality of your life is in exact proportion to the amount of uncertainty you can comfortably live with. And so if you can't live with uncertainty, you're going to have a lot of suffering. And uncertainty in business is not a temporary thing. It's part of the tuition of business, because it will constantly happen to you. So the hidden gift in all of this is that while this given may seem annoying, it's actually where you get to grow your greatest assets, where you get to learn about being flexible. You learn to be creative because something doesn't work out and you have to think of a different way. You learn how to emotionally regulate yourself. You also learn how to lead at a different level because you've got to emotionally kind of project onto your team and keep them calm as well. You learn about resilience. You learn about problem solving because things don't go according to plan and you've got to come up with a different way. If things always went according to plan, you would not only be bored, right? But you'd also never have to grow. And so this is actually a gift that things don't go according to plan. So what you can do to reduce suffering here is to remember that you need to stop arguing with the idea that this shouldn't be happening. It wasn't supposed to go this way. Because you're fighting with reality again, you're going to lose your time, you're going to lose your energy, and you're really going to be focusing on the wrong thing, which is fighting the fact that this plan didn't work out instead of pivoting and saying, what do I do next? How do we work through this? So a practical tool I wanted to share with you was how to pivot without the spiral. So I would encourage you when something blows up to really try to come to terms with it pretty quickly and move on to solutions. And so some of the things you can do in the first, couple minutes of something not going according to plan is name the facts, what actually happened. Name your feeling. Maybe you feel disappointed, maybe you feel angry, maybe you feel scared, maybe you feel worried. Name the story that you're telling yourself. Like, what is the meaning you're giving to all of this? Because ultimately our meanings control our emotions. And so coming and recognizing what meaning you're giving to it and whether or not you're fighting with reality will help you be able to kind of have a different viewpoint or different perspective on it. And then now you can move on. Now that you've recognized that this is not going according to plan, you felt the feelings, you can now move on. Ideally, this happens in just a couple minutes. Maybe it takes you 30 minutes initially. Maybe it takes you a couple hours initially, but over time it will reduce as you follow this kind of more practical strategy. And then you start to ultimately choose the next move. One of the things that's always helped me is also saying, hey, this can be life happening for me. How is this life happening for me? How can I help make sure this is life happening for me? And that allows me to shift without as much suffering to be able to come up with solutions and to be able to move forward. So ultimately, this given number 2, which is things do not always go according to plan, is a gift that will, again, help you reduce suffering in your business if you start to live it. Okay, that brings us to given number 3, which is life is not always fair. And that really tells you that what we perceive as injustice or inequalities, they do happen sometimes. And when you accept this, it again can reduce frustration and bitterness and also foster some compassion for you. So this one can sting because many of us, especially women who have worked hard, we've trained hard, we've served hard, and we have this deep internal belief that if I do the right thing, the right thing's going to happen. And we are constantly looking to make sure that things are fair around us. I can definitely tell you this is part of how I grew up. I was always comparing what was fair within my family. And so it, of course, came to business as well. But sometimes in business, you can watch something and somebody with less integrity or less skill or less depth, they still win. Or you can watch somebody copy your work and actually grow faster. Or you can see somebody get opportunities that you deserve and they get them. Or your clients will choose to work with somebody cheaper who's not going to take care of them. There are so many things that happen within business that we can call unfair, and we can sit there and we can suffer saying that's not fair. Now, there are a couple truths that I wanted to share with you. Number 1 is your sense of fair is real, but it's also subjective. And this can be a hard one to swallow, but realize that it's really your perspective and you don't see the whole picture. You don't see what the other person is doing. You don't see the whole situation that the person who made that choice or that decision can see. So really it's a perspective, and it's a perspective without all of the information. So that might help soften the blow a little bit here. And then number 2 is fairness is not a dependable business strategy. What is dependable is giving as much value as you can to your clients and letting that guide how you operate. And sometimes things are not going to go your way, but if you continue to show up, you continue to give more value than anyone else, give the most value you can, care about your customers, care about the people you serve, ultimately down the road, that's going to come back to you in spades. So some things may happen that are not fair, or at least your perspective of fair initially, but down the road, you continue to show up, you continue to serve. That's going to serve your business long-term more than fighting with, is this fair or is this not fair? Now, it's also important to know that the suffering doesn't just come from something being quote unquote unfair. It actually comes when you replay that, when you narrate it, when you complain to others about it, when you collect evidence of why it was unfair, and you're keeping score and you're carrying this around. That's really, really heavy. And I think a lot of us can see this in our kids, especially, and this is an easy example, is when our kids are saying, well, that situation's not fair. They got something and I didn't get it. And I have to tell you, I tell this to my kids all the time. I say, life isn't fair. And each of you are different kids. And so each of you I treat differently based on what I think that you need, right? And so I'm teaching my kids this very, very early on, whereas I was raised by a family that then tried to keep score and tried to keep things fair. And what a waste of energy. And, in my perspective, things were still not fair. So you don't want to get kind of caught up in this fairness and trying to make things fair. You just want to acknowledge, hey, yeah, life isn't fair. Sometimes things don't go the way I think that they should. That's my perspective. And you know what? I'm just going to continue to do what I know to be the right thing. I'm going to continue to show up. I'm going to continue to serve. I'm going to continue to give value. And in the end, this is going to be one blip along the way. And I'm going to end up in a totally different place because I showed up and I did what was right. And I didn't keep score and I didn't worry about those little things and let them slow me along for the real big perspective and really where this business is going. Now, as much as you're modeling this for your kids, I also want you to model this for your team, because teams can get really emotional about something not being fair, not only between them, but also with the external competitors, for example. And you don't want them living in this anger and you don't want them wasting energy in it. So you as a CEO also want to model this for your team where you're like, yes, that maybe that was unfair. I definitely am not pleased about it as well, but let's move forward and let's focus on what we can do and let's go serve and let's focus on doing what we know to be right. And that allows people to kind of move through this space and not get stuck on the unfairness and the suffering that can happen there. Given number 4 is pain is part of life. And this is the most painful given, especially for a lot of us who really want to focus on the good and move through to solutions right away. But one of the important keys with this is that suffering and disappointment and loss are part of the human experience, both in personal life and also in business. But if you deny it or you kind of bury it, it actually amplifies the pain. And it amplifies the pain for you and it amplifies the pain for all those around you. So it's really one of those important things that you want to acknowledge and then you want to move through. And it's one that's taken me a long period of time to really personally deal with, because I always want to see the bright side and I always want to move directly to the bright side. But when you deny pain, you're not actually appreciating it, experiencing it, and you're not allowing others that space to be able to do that. That can actually backfire. And so when you're a leader in a business, it's important to acknowledge that sometimes things are hard, sometimes things hurt, sometimes you're disappointed, sometimes you lose money, sometimes you lose people that you didn't want to lose. It's not a sign that you're doing it wrong. This is just part of life, right? Pain is part of life. But you just really want to acknowledge it, put it out there, feel the feels, and then that allows you the space to be able to move forward and go into solutions and go into the opportunity to be able to use the situation and build from it. So we really need to normalize that there is pain in business. And I really do try to do that in this podcast as well, just to acknowledge that there's hard parts of business, but there's also great parts of business. And business isn't great every single month. There are fluctuations in business. We talked about change. Change can be challenging. Change can really set you off kilter. And so there is going to be pain in building something meaningful in business. And what I always remind myself is, yeah, pain is inevitable, but staying in suffering is completely optional. You can have those couple moments or minutes or hours of suffering, but ultimately moving forward, going to those solutions, that's absolutely your choice. And you don't want to stay in that victim space for long periods of time where you're saying, woe me, this is so painful. I'm just going to stay here and have a lot of suffering. And ultimately that affects everybody in your team as well, right? Because that's what you're modeling. And so I think there's a space here for a gentle reframe when you hit a hard moment to say, hey, this is part of the experience of business. Pain is part of life. I can do hard things and then continue to move forward and use some of the skills and the things that we talked about earlier to be able to help you through this. And finally, we're to given number 5, which is people are not loyal and loving all the time. This one, again, is just such an incredibly helpful one because it allows you to move forward with less suffering when somebody acts in a way that you don't think that they should have. So we all have definitions of what is loyalty and what it means for somebody to be loyal. And we probably have different definitions of what that means. We also have definitions for what it means to be loving. And the fact is that those are our personal definitions and not everybody shares them. And so sometimes people act in certain ways. A lot of times it's because they need to act that way because of their human needs that are driving them and they had no other option based on the information they had and who they are at the time. So they act in a certain way that we don't think is loving or we don't think is loyal. And we have a lot of distress around that. But the key with this given is to recognize, again, the distress like we talked about a little bit earlier, but be able to move through it, realizing that people are not always going to act the way that we think they should. We can be friends with somebody for 20 years and they can act in a way behaviorally that we don't think is loving or loyal. Now, one of the cool things about this is if you have a lot of emotional bank built up with somebody, a lot of times you're able to say, okay, they just had a bad day, or they just had a moment where they didn't act in the way that they would normally act. And to also have compassion for yourself and realization for yourself that you sometimes have a bad day. Sometimes you don't bring your best self to a situation or to a relationship either. And so it's a normal part that you also don't do, is you don't act in loving and loyal ways to everyone around you. And again, you may be acting in a way that's loving and loyal that you think, but they may not be seeing it that way. And so it just allows a lot more compassion, both for others and for yourself, when you accept this, given that people are not loving and loyal all the time, and allows you to move forward, allows you ideally to be able to say they did the best they could with the information they had and with who they are at this moment, and to be able to, again, move forward to solutions, move forward with the relationship, find forgiveness, and be able to have less suffering along the way. That's why this one is such a valuable one, because as humans, we're always having interactions with other humans, and this stuff is bound to happen in your intimate relationships, as well as your business relationships, as well as with employees. So why not be aware of it ahead of time and realize you can move through this space with a lot more ease? So I wanted to share another 2-step process for this one, which is, number one, recognize your emotions. Don't bypass them. Name them. What are you feeling about this situation? So I feel hurt. I feel angry. I feel betrayed. Then again, examine the story you're telling. What is the meaning you're giving to what that person did? Because you could have 2 different meanings based on that emotional bank we were talking about. You could say they're a jerk, they're a horrible person if you don't know them very well, and they don't bring their best selves that day, and they don't act in a way that you think is loving or loyal. Or you could say, hey, they were having a bad day, because it's somebody who you have a lot of emotional connection with and you're making an excuse for them. So examine the story that you're telling, the meaning that you're giving to the situation, and then reflect again on yourself and when you weren't your best self, and find a way to forgive and to move on, and to remember, this is a given. People are not loving and loyal all the time. Now, I want to put all these givens together and give you a practical way you can use them this week. So look at one situation in your business right now that maybe it's been creating stress or struggle or some suffering. Maybe it's a launch, maybe it's a team issue, maybe it's a cash flow issue or marketing, whatever it is. Look at that issue and say, okay, is there change that I am resisting, right? Everything changes, everything ends. And remember, something new begins after that. Look at it and say, what isn't going according to plan? And how am I arguing with that, right? And maybe that plan needs to shift or change. Or where am I stuck in, this isn't fair, and I'm having a lot of suffering around that, and I'm not able to move forward because I could keep focusing on fairness. Or what pain am I trying to avoid feeling? Maybe I'm trying to pretend everything's okay and I'm not really acknowledging that I feel some pain, and then go and acknowledge that pain and allow it to shift through. Or where am I expecting people to be loving and loyal or perfect where they're not, where they screwed up? And again, reflect on yourself and the last time you've done that with them specifically. And then take one grounded action after you've really acknowledged this situation and applied those 5 givens to it, to adjust the plan or have a conversation with somebody, or maybe you need to simplify an offer or set a boundary or ask somebody for some help, or even just spend some time thinking on it, reflecting on it, go outside, get some exercise, and allow yourself to feel the feels and move it through you. This is what it means to lead your business as a true leader. You lead yourself, you lead your emotions, you lead the way that you are dealing with situations so you have less suffering, and models it for everybody else. And so when you as a leader deal with these things and really use the 5 givens to move through them, it's going to allow everyone in your business to have a lot less suffering and to be able to move through these situations with a lot more ease as well. So now we've covered David Rico's 5 givens and how they apply to business. And my hope is that you internalize these, that you use them day to day in your business, and that they reduce suffering for you as well as everybody around you. And again, I would also encourage you to use them in your personal life and to teach them to your children, because this will help them a lot in the long term. Now, if this episode gave you some clarity, some inspiration, maybe a deeper understanding of business, make sure to subscribe to the Build and Scale Boldly podcast so you never miss what's next. And if you know another bold woman who's leading a business who needs to hear this message, share this episode with her. Let's normalize growth. Let's normalize ease in business. Keep dreaming big, keep leading boldly, and most of all, keep building the business and the life that you love. I'll see you next time.